Welcome to the Oh So Spurs podcast. A slightly different setting as I'm filming this one from Las Vegas, but today we're going to be discussing how do you fix Tottenham Hotspur? There's a number of reasons that are going around at the moment where we all point the blame. Was it our transfer priorities? Is it our own fan base? Is it our expectations? Is it poor foundations from previous managers and our owners? Is it the rapid shift to a new style? Or maybe are you just biased towards whether you wanted Ange in or Ange out from the start, and that might lead to your perception of how things are going for Spurs? We haven't even then touched on the injuries, the fatigue, and everything else around the club right now, like the new structure with Johan Langer and Scott Munn. Well, to decipher all this, and as well we're going to be jumping into your questions you sent in, is Stu in Dubai. How are you, Stu?
All good, all good.
Good to have you on. And we've got Sai in sunny Basel. How are you, Sai?
Yeah, how you doing, mate? Yeah, not too bad. Not too bad. Vegas all right? Treating you well?
Vegas is treating me well. It's day one.
Good.
Sun is shining. So
remember, it stays there, right? It stays there.
It never stays in Vegas. But guys, it's a long list of topics, right? We've discussed this in the past. And we felt this was the right moment to go into them in more detail because I think people look for simple answers to complex situations. And we've listed off 10 potential reasons, 10 things that have led to this moment in time where Spurs sit 14th in the league and are struggling against teams like Everton. And the instant fan reaction is often to go, well, change the manager. Bring in some fresh blood. Let's start with that new figurehead of the first team. But we don't think that's necessarily the answer, although the manager isn't blameless. So where do you want to start? Should we start with the expectations around Ange, maybe, and this confirmation bias we discussed before the show, which has led to kind of a divided fan base? And Stu, I think was it Stu or Sai? One of you two mentioned this before. It was well highlighted that you had thoughts on this.
Both probably got thoughts on it. I think if you go back to the start of Ange's tenure, I think that there was a certain amount of the media. Fans, both Spurs and other fans, that were sort of like, well, this isn't your first choice. He's second best at best. He's come from Japan. He's come from Australia. He's come from the Scottish leagues. He's never going to make that step up. And I think there is a certain amount of confirmation bias within that and within the media base as well. The "I told you so." I think that said, the back end of last season and what we've been through this season isn't good enough. And I think he says it himself, it's not good enough. Is that down to all of the things that you mentioned before? It's probably all of the above. You could probably put a tick behind or beside all of those reasons that you listed off, Jim. And I think what you need to do is now look at what is the short, medium and longer term fixes. And is Ange the man to do that? I still think that he is. Is he going to come under more pressure if we wobble against, or not wobble, that's a nonsense word, if we crash against Leicester at the weekend? And yeah, he will. There'll be more and more pressure piling. And I know that we'll talk about it a little bit later on, but Levy's held his nerve so far. How long will he hold his nerve if the results continue to be like this? Because yesterday, I think, and going off on a tangent a bit, but we discussed before we started recording, yesterday's first half performance was not to do with injuries. That was to do with a team not understanding how to play within a new system and just looking lost and chaotic. So Ange has got to have something to do with that. You know, that's down to the manager. He made those choices.
It feels like when you get into this cycle of games where there's a match every 3 days, so the manager doesn't have a training match day one after games. We understand it. You finish a game, players go home, they come in late the next day, and it's purely about recovery, right? It's ice baths, whatever else they do, physio work, stretching. The next day after that, again, is a couple of hours training, and typically 1 hour of that is, looking at video footage and analysis rather than being on the pitch. And then it's a bit of, okay, let's look at our shape, but it's nothing that requires too much physical work because you're still in recovery over the next 48 hours. And then you've got the next game coming up in 24 hours. And you're going, okay, we can't train properly the next day because tomorrow's a football match. So again, it's just a little bit of light work, pack your bags, get some good night's sleep because we're off again. So it's hard for a manager to go when the players in the squad are shifting all the time through injury and fatigue.
Yeah.
You're the new group. Here's how you're going to play. Now execute it.
Yeah.
Or is this my confirmation bias going on?
Well, maybe a bit, but just to come back on that a little bit, Jim, I get that. So why go to a back three if you can't train with it? Why not stick with the back four, the 4-3-3? Because you've trained that for a year and a half. Why move to a new system when you haven't got the time? And this is where the Bournemouth, you've had all this today. Bournemouth got loads of injuries as well. The Bournemouth comparison is nonsense because Bournemouth have got a week in between every match to train, to come together, to review, to get on the grass, to do the changes. Don't get me wrong, Iriola's doing a brilliant job and Bournemouth played some superb football at the weekend. But they've got time to get together on the training pitch. So I just don't understand why he suddenly went to three at the back when to your point, he hasn't got the time on the training ground to even test it.
I think that I can understand the logic behind going back to three at the back because he thought, right, we are a bit suspect, so going three at the back, it might be better at shoring up the defense. But I agree with Sai completely. You didn't have the time to work on it. It made much more sense to put Davis back against Drago and put Gray in midfield, in my opinion. But again, I think, we shouldn't forget that we were sixth, 3 points off top four with the third best defense before we lost our two centre-backs. And then we lost our left back and our goalkeeper. So it isn't that things were a disaster prior to losing injuries. Because everyone keeps going about our poor form, 9 wins in 9 months, 11 wins in 11 months, whatever it is. The fact that includes the summer when we didn't actually play any games is neither here nor there. But it's still not a good record. But I think, we all agree that a lot of those early results when we did have a full squad were false results. Our XG was brilliant. And we just dropped points because of particularly senior players such as Romero at fault for at least 3 goals, costing us 3 results. And I think that going back to Romero and senior players, I think that's where Ange has been let down a lot this season because we have gone young in the summer, which I think a lot of us did criticize that we also needed senior as well as the younger players. But he needed the senior players to step up and help the younger players. Where if you look at games like yesterday and even previous games, it's the youngsters who are standing up and fighting, and the main players like Madison, who's been absolutely shocking, and Son. I mean, when we went 1-0 down, I still believe that if Son had finished off that chance to quickly put us back at 1-1, Everton, who were a side not full of confidence, that would have knocked them. But the fact he missed it, and then they went up the other end and scored, it was kind of game over. But it's Son, our captain, you expect to finish that easily, who didn't do it. So at the end of the day, the players have got to look in the mirror.
Yep.
Does this then kind of start leading into the topic around whether one of the other many points towards the situation is whether we got the transfers? You mentioned youth there. Right. Not just in terms of youth and seniority, but whether we've gotten them right in certain positions. Because Ange's system, the goals are going to come from 3 main positions. They're going to come from your striker, your left winger, and your right winger.
Mm-hmm.
But we went into a season with the belief that Brennan Johnson was going to be a capable right winger of starting most weeks and be our star player on that position, and Son on the left-hand side. But it's clear even when those front 3 are fit, bar Solanke, we've done something wrong there because those 3, we know they're not up to standard. We know Solanke is a really good striker on his day, but if he doesn't have capable right and left wingers running off him, the whole system kind of doesn't really work in the final third of the pitch, does it?
Yeah, I think we come back to the injury list again as well. I mean, you couldn't forecast Odegaard being out for the season, and that would have been the Johnson's challenger on the right hand side, right? And listen, we know that Timo's not the finisher that we would like him to be, but he's been particularly bad this year, and you would have thought that him and Son on the left would have given you options at least. And then through the middle, we got We got the quaver that is Richarlison that can't stay fit for 2 minutes. And I thought, God, whose heart went when he scored the goal yesterday as well? Just thought, oh no, he's snapped again.
Yeah.
But again, that was the backup. That's the backup for Solanke. How do you legislate for some of that? How do you legislate for Bentancur being racist and headbutting the pitch? You know, there's some of this stuff. How do you legislate for Vicario breaking his leg? Although silver linings, you know, we've brought forward Kinski boots, and he's doing particularly well, and that's going to be a good challenge. And then how do you legislate for your two centre halves, and then your other two centre halves going out injured as well? It's and I know that I sort of alluded to the fact that yesterday wasn't all about the injuries because it was about application as well. But I then think that if you look at that side yesterday and you've got the youngsters sitting on the bench coming on to be impact players against your first 11 that are currently out, that's a very different question that you've got then. You've got some you've got Berval, you got Mikey Moore, you got Archie Gray, you know, you got these guys sitting on the bench that are impact subs. And that was planned to be their development. It was never planned that they were going to be first team regulars this season, ever.
I think also, sorry, I think, you know, I didn't agree with it, but I could understand why he went for the loan for Werner, because he's thinking of, you know, he doesn't want to bring in someone long term that's going to get ahead of Mikey Moore, and maybe after summer, after a decent 6 months, to be honest, you know, let's not forget his goals and assists and own goals created in at last season when he joined us. No one could foresee that. Not only did he not kick on, but he's regressed. But I think, again, you know, I still agree with the youth purchases that we made last summer, because we had to bring in youth because of the squad issues and the quota issues that we had to address. It was a simple fact. I do think, and I know Jim's on board with that, is we should have bought the senior players at 6 and left back as well. And that's where we let Ange down.
6 for sure. We said that pre-season that we were crying out for that quality 6 that can control that part of the park.
Does this, guys, before we miss the chance to kind of bring it up, because it fits into what you were saying there, we haven't mentioned Misfortune yet, really, because you can talk about injuries being unlucky and impact injuries are. So yes, like you said, Si, Bentancur deciding to say, watch this, and swan diving to headbutt the ground. Vicario having a bad tackle on his foot. Solanke injuring his knee in training. You know, Odegaard, we don't know if that was from being overworked or just, you know, a bit of an accident that happened from, you know, being too aggressive in a sprint or whatever. But some of these injuries have been unfortunate. Bentancur's ban. But then there is a bit of misfortune right in there as well, because if you look at the timing of Richarlison's return, this seems to be the never-ending theme for Spurs. They go, great, Solanke's desperate for a rest, his deputy's back, but literally the day before he's about to get his final due rest, he gets his injury. So now Richarlison's going to be playing 90-minute matches when he's not ready.
Yep.
And we've seen similar things when Davies came back, Romero and Van der Ven. And one goes, and the next goes, and the next goes, because you need that opportunity to have two fit players at the same position going to be able to rotate healthily. And Spurs seem to get that unfortunate timing with injuries, which then compounds the injuries and just makes the position more and more unsustainable.
I think Ange has been incredibly unlucky. I mean, I don't know how many black cats he must have driven over, because to have it not just one season, but 2 seasons in a row, and the second season, you know, probably even worse than the first. And it's just allowed, you know, his critics to just pile on. I mean, I was listening to Amorim after the Man U defeat, and him going on again about, you know, I will never change my tactics. And no one's calling him out for this. No one's calling him naive. No one's calling him, you know, need to adapt to the Premier League. You've only ever coached in farmer leagues. And again, it just goes back, I think, to Ange coming from Australia, doesn't have a European accent, doesn't really have the European pedigree. So therefore, we're going to mock him. And despite the fact that he has changed tactics, we're not, even before obviously the Everton game, we're not playing the same high line and the high press that we were previously. So he has altered things slightly. People are still coming up with the same narratives that he does the same over and over again. He's naive, he won't change. But other managers do it and even come out and say it, and they're fine. They get away with it. You know, no criticism. It's just bizarre.
That confirmation bias is really highlighted with the defence in many ways, because despite having pretty much at the moment, we've got 2 half-fit centre-backs in Dragusin and Davies, and they're the third and fourth choice fit centre-backs, and this situation's been going on a while. We've got the best away defensive record in the league, yet if you listen to the analysis of our own fan base and media pundits, it's still naive, overly attacking football, and if you had a manager who would play more defensively, we'd get results in these tricky away games. But I don't really see how we could improve on having the best defence in the league and score more goals, going more defensive away from home. So it does feel like, again, is that confirmation bias coming through of whether you wanted Ange in and Ange out, and it's just a kind of an easy argument to have on both sides, right? Because as well, eye test, we know we're vulnerable at the back. We know that stat flatters us. We don't have the best defence in the league. We know that. But
I think, Jim, the defensive piece is an easy go-to, right? I think a lot of the time when I think about it, it's not just about the defensive actions, it's the being able to control a game. We don't ever feel like we're controlling a game at the moment. We feel like we're very reactive to what's going on. If the ball goes our way and it's a team that plays a style that we quite like, then actually we go on and we score 2, 3, 4 goals. But I never really feel like we get hold of the ball, we slow the game down, we take the sting out of stuff. It's always, hair and scare and helter-skelter football with us, which when we're winning, it's wonderful. But when we're losing, it looks as though we've said probably about the last 3 or 4 podcasts where it feels like the opposition at times has loads of space, but we never have any space. And I think that's down to our lack of control especially in the middle of the park, where, the youngsters are doing, Berval's doing brilliantly, don't get me wrong, but he's 18 and he's playing in the best league in the world. So he's going to get found out if he doesn't have experience around him. And yesterday he didn't really have the experience around. Well, he had Maddison, but I don't know where he was playing. I think he was playing over at Anfield, wasn't he? I don't think he was playing at Goodison Park. For one of the deputy captains and leader of the pack, you've got to have a look at yourself, mate, because you should be dragging these lads up by their bootstraps and bringing them along for the ride, not going hiding in matches.
I think it goes back to saying before about we missed that 6 in the summer, and I think again yesterday Sarr was having to play kind of in the 6, and it's not his position, and he was at fault for the first goal. He kind of gave it away, and then didn't make a good job of trying to get it back before Calvert-Lewis basically sold all our defense and goalkeeper for a trip for free to the right, and he put it left. But it's a case of, I think we can't do much at the moment. It's as simple as that. If we bring in a new manager, what are they going to do?
So I know we're on the same page that as this topic is how we fix Spurs. I think we're on a similar conclusion that changing the manager doesn't fix Tottenham. It doesn't fix our current situation. As Si mentioned, the short, medium, and long-term fixes. You could argue, and it's completely understandable if you're not pro Postecoglou, you don't think it's the long-term answer. But the short-term doesn't fix from changing the manager. It might be that that's part of the long-term or medium-term solution, but it's certainly not part of the short-term solution. In this moment in time where you've got a game every 3 days and all these players missing, there's not much someone else can do. But Stu, talking about something you mentioned earlier and you touched on then, it's the transfers and the priority of transfers, needing that 6, needing that left back. You look at the squad Ange inherited and you say, look, you look at the players he inherited and the ones he's got now. Out of the ones he inherited, he's got how many players that he had that he could build a team around? Maybe Romero, and it's even hard to argue Bentancur's the perfect fit. So he's kind of got maybe 1 or 2, and Udogie, maybe 2 or 3 players in that whole squad of 25 players, but you could think, right, that's his foundation. He's got a core group he can build around. So this comes from not just one poor transfer window, but several years of transfers aimed at pragmatic low block coaching, and even then getting the transfers wrong, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Pretty much.
What can you say?
Pretty
The only thing
much.
I would say about Romero is even Romero, he can't rely on, that stat I brought out the other day that Romero's missed more than a third of the games that we've played since he's joined us.
Yeah.
I mean, that's appalling
Yeah.
for one of
Yeah.
our supposed star players to miss a third over 3 seasons.
22 injuries. I got the stats up for. He said 22 injuries since joining Spurs.
Wow.
That's a lot for the amount of time he's been with us and for a player that age in that position.
Yeah.
It's quite alarming, really. So even then, you're saying his most senior players can't stay fit.
Yeah.
And it makes you question whether that's why Romero wasn't made captain as well. If he's just not.
And then coming back to that though, and you raised it, Stu, that this isn't a one-off for us. This sort of happened last year as well with suspensions and injuries. We seem to have an inordinate amount of hamstring injuries, and I don't know whether that's. I haven't looked at the stats for other teams. I don't know if there's a, sort of like an over-indication on hamstring injuries with other teams as well, and that's an indication of squad size and intensity of the league, etc., etc. But then it does then, I think it's a legitimate question then to question the training methods and the medical staff about how are they managing those types of injuries. Now, the impact ones I absolutely get there. That's an accident, right? Vicario breaking his ankle, that's an accident. Yeah. But we've seem to have an inordinate amount of hamstring injuries, and that must be something to do with intensity. It must be something to do with training methods and recovery, etc., and rehabilitation. Because wasn't there? I can't remember what podcast it was on, but we're currently advertising for a new head of medical, I think. So there's something going on there, right? So that then comes back to your short, medium, long term fix, Jim, and that backroom stuff is all medium to long. That doesn't. You can replace your recruitment people. You can put a head of football in, a new head of medical. That doesn't reap any sort of rewards for 18 months to 2 years.
Yeah.
This is why I think it goes back to the club actually backing Ange, because Ange was asked about that at the last press conference prior to the Everton game.
That's right. That's where I heard it. Yeah.
So it's all about this new head of the whole medical department who was brought in last summer, has been given, had a few months to look around at what he wants to change. And that's why all these jobs have now appeared on LinkedIn, because he's had time to evaluate the department and kind of reshuffle things and bring new people in. And I think that is all about, and that's what Ali Gold's been saying about the club are looking to build a structure to support Ange.
Yeah.
And that's why I think also the club have been more, I don't know if the right word is loyal to the manager despite poor results this time around, is because they know what promises they've made Ange. They know how they backed him with youth players. They know perhaps the medical structure wasn't in place for the style of play he wanted to play, which is why we're having this injury impact. So they've made all these commitments, which is why they're saying, okay, it is partially on us. And I'm hoping they also acknowledge the fact that it's the 20th of January today, and we haven't brought in a single outfield player despite the long list of outfield players who are injured.
Is this again then back to the short, medium and long term that we've brought in a manager who wants to, the fan base wants short-term results. We're a fan base. We always want short-term fixes. But the board have made a shift, and you can see that by them sticking with Ange, like you said, which is a different change in stance from Levy. Say, actually, we've tried doing this whole short-term compete thing with Mourinho and Conte. And we have tried spending big and going for Ndombeles and the Celsos and Sanchez. Let's try win now. Let's get the best out of Harry Kane, Heung-min Son, and do this now. Realised we've tried that, but we're big, but we're not big enough to compete with those clubs and win doing that way. So the manager's going, I've got all these short-term issues from long-term mismanagement of the club to handle, but now you've shifted your whole transfer and recruitment policy to a long-term approach. So I'm stuck in the middle of this, trying to work with your long-term answers to my short-term problems. And the fans are there going, one half of us agrees with that, and we're in here for the long haul, just don't get relegated this year. And the other half are going, a club our size simply cannot be in 14th. And you touched on was Ange back? I think it was you, Stu. We did the numbers earlier, and we got from Deloitte's Money League and Transfermarkt and Statista some various numbers to see, are Spurs backing Ange? If you look at the spend, I took a 3-year average. I know he hasn't been here 3 years, but you get an idea of how much money the club spends. So far, over the last 3 years, we haven't got the January spend complete yet. Spurs are the 8th biggest club in the world in terms of revenue. Yet we spend net transfers the 4th most on transfer fees.
Mm-hmm.
So we overspend, actually. We do. Over the last 3 years, we've backed the manager more than our rivals as a percentage on transfer fees.
Yep.
But then on wages, we spend 49% of our revenue on wages, whereas someone like Arsenal spends 60%, as an example. We're by far the lowest team in terms of wage percent revenue. But again, is that because we're shifting towards young players, guys? Or is that's always been the way of us, though, right? With wages, it's kind of held us back a bit.
I agree. I think we need to increase our wage percentage. We've always been the lowest. But I think it is a natural that it's dropped to 49, almost 50, is because we've got rid of all our high wage earners and brought in youngsters from abroad as well, which obviously they earn less abroad, so we don't have to pay them as much of a premium as if you take them from another Premier League club. So it's natural that it's dropped, and I would just assume that we're basically following the same thing we did on the Poch. On the Poch, we invested in a whole bunch of young players, and then we kept breaking our wage structure to keep the likes of Dele, Eriksson, Kane, Son, etc., and kept renewing them up and up and up. So I presume we would do the same again. I do think, and that's exactly what Arsenal did. When Arsenal did the rebuild under Arteta, their wage bill went down a lot as well as they brought in a lot of youngsters.
Because they had Aubameyang and Lacazette.
Exactly.
They cleared those. Ozil, they cleared that lot out, didn't they?
So now Arsenal's has gone up again because they've done a round of renewals, whereas I think ours will go up as well. What I do think, and I was looking at your chart, Jim, was the average tends to be around 60%. I don't think it's right, and I wouldn't be happy if we were ever spending 70 or the 95 that Paris Saint-Germain is spending. But I think we should be aiming around that 60 mark, which is the same as the likes of Bayern and those. I mean, those are players, those are clubs that are run well. That I think we should benchmark at 60. And I think, that's where I would hope that the club do go forward and do up to make sure that we don't lose big players like that.
Yeah, and I think coming back to that, you raised the previous big spends that we did, and Ndombele is the prime example of that. Was done based on what? Based on the eye test, based on the scouting network, but not really based on data. And I think what you've got to do now is, I think the short-term fix now is 1 or 2 big signings based on the data that Langer and his team produce. And I think Levy has to make some sort of marquee signing, whether it's now in January or whether it's in the summer. I think he's got to go out and get a strengthening. That I still come back to that number 6. I think you need a big marquee signing in that 6 that says we're serious, based on the new recruitment strategy. Whereas before it was based on, I quite like that player. He's pretty good in France. We've been and watched him a few times. We haven't seen him down McDonald's, but he's a bit of a lazy git. But I'm sure we could, train that out of him. Yeah.
And this goes back to the long term again.
Exactly.
And where we heard the club, the leaks were from reliable people. It might have been Annie Gold. I'm not going to quote that because it could be wrong. But someone said, the club have been so impressed with Archie Gray, classic Spurs line, so impressed with Archie Gray, they think they've got their future number 6 there.
Yeah.
But this
future is the key there, Jim. Future.
And this is where a Chelsea go, that's great. I'm glad I've got an Archie Gray, but I'm still going to go spend 80 million on Enzo.
Yeah.
And you're like, we're going to have both. Where Spurs go, I'm not sure about that right now. Let's see how things go. We seem to take a bit more of a pragmatic approach. And is that pragmatism part of our problem, guys? Or
Maybe.
Is that pragmatism what?
I think Levy is, you can always, it's always been his drawback. I tend to be, I'm not obviously, despite accusations, a Levy lover, but I've always been more pro than con. I think he's done more good than bad. But I think it has always been a fair finger point at the fact he's far too conservative at times. I mean, who's ever going to forget the Saha Nelson window when we could have pushed on? And I think this is a time where he needs to, push the boat out. Like, I'm pleased that we've already brought forward the keeper 6 months, based on the idea that Forster's going to leave. This is the guy marked, we need a keeper now, let's bring him in. And I'm hoping they do the same thing, knowing that in the summer we're going to move on either one of Bissouma, so let's bring in at 6. We are going to need left back. Reguilon's going to leave. We need to bring in a left back now. So I'm hoping that they carry on that slight shift that this beginning of this window showed. And I hope he doesn't revert to type and say, well, we've done one, that's enough. Don't want to risk too much, because that really is holding us back.
Stu, you made some good points before doing the analysis. People often overlook, and you touched on this briefly earlier, but I think we should expand on it, the homegrown and club-grown issue, where you have to have a certain number of club-grown and homegrown players if you want a squad large enough to compete. And because we didn't plan ahead of transfers, we're at a mass shortage. We've sold the likes of Harry Winks and Ollie Skip because they're not good enough. Fine. We're reliant on keeping players like Fraser Forster in the squad, but the only way to fix this is either bring through more academy players, and we know that we don't have enough Premier League standard academy players, as most clubs don't, to rely on alone. You've got to buy some in. And the longer you leave that problem, and you don't buy an Archie Gray, you don't buy a Lucas Berryval, you don't buy a Vuskovic over a senior player, that problem just compounds and gets worse, because you need to get these players in 3 years before they turn 21 and registered with your club. So it does feel a bit like we've had to bite a bullet due to previous mistakes, which has now led to us having had to overly prioritise youth at a pivotal moment. And now you've got Ange on a dinghy out in the middle of the sea screaming for help, and Levy and Langer are scratching their heads on the shore. They don't know how to help him, because they've got to get this balance right all the time. I think if I help him too much now in the short term and blow all our summer budget on less good players now, because you get less good players typically in January available, we're now shooting ourselves a foot in the game, because it's all about getting that balance. And I feel Spurs are just in a big tangled mess.
Yeah.
They didn't have a path and a strategy, and they've only just set one with Ange. And it's going to, go on, Simon.
Yeah, and also, Jim, but on that about availability of players, I think this season is the first season where we've seen the European competitions tip into January. So the players that you might want to be looking at for those marquee signings are almost certainly still in the Champions League at the moment.
Yeah.
They're almost certainly still, clubs are reliant on them, whereas in the past, you might have been able to nick someone off of a club that had gone out of the group stages, potentially. Maybe a surprise exit, maybe whatever it is. But you've got players that are registered in Europe that still need to be in Europe, and clubs aren't going to let them go in January. And no. I get this. There's 10 days to go, and we're looking for something big or volume of people coming in. But it's not easy in January, unless you're a Manchester City, who are stockpiling now because they're going to get a massive transfer embargo, almost certainly. That's why they're stockpiling people now, because they're going to have 2 or 3 seasons where they can't do anything. Who else has signed significant? Yeah, Villa have strengthened a bit. Who else?
Well, just City, who, again, they're buying young, though. And
yeah, because they know that they're not going to be able to buy going forwards, but they're not selling to cover that youth. So who else is buying big at the moment? Like I said, Villa, I think, have had a couple of signings, I think. But who else?
I think that's a very good point you made. I didn't think about that. The fact that Europa, Champions League games are still going on, so clubs don't know if they're through or not, so they're not willing to risk. I think that is playing a key point in people being able to buy or sell. And I think, and Ange pointed out as well, is other clubs are aware of the situation we're in and have just tripled fees. And, whereas before I was saying, Levy needs to stop being so conservative. On the other hand, I do understand that if we're after a 50 million quid player and people are asking 100 million for him, he's thinking, that doesn't really make sense.
Yeah. The whole, I've kind of lost my train of thought on that now, but the whole balance is nigh on impossible to fix unless you are willing to suffer in the short term, right? I think is where we're coming to this. And I feel like we're in a position where the fan base has got no patience left, because they've had to be patient for Conte, Nuno, Mourinho, the list goes on, that they've heard this story so many times, they don't want to wait any longer. But before, I feel it was different because there wasn't a plan. There generally wasn't a plan then. It was just, let's try get Harry Kane to score 50 goals and we'll win the lot. And you got Heung-min Son whacking in 20 there as well. whatever it is. Whereas now it feels like, yeah, I can see the vision, but until mid-February, even if we do bring in 2 players now, I can't really see anything really changing until that date. You've still got a game every 3 days, so the players aren't going to get rest. More players are going to get injured than are going to come back. The fixtures aren't going to relent. So if you were to move on from Ange and bring in someone else, all that would happen is someone new comes in mid-February, the players then get their week's rest in mid-Feb, all these players come back from injury. It gives a false perspective that things have been upticked because of a manager, but then we've got to rebuild our squad even more because we've now got a new manager with a new philosophy and a new way of playing all over again. And so the Tottenham cycle begins.
There's another point that I think we haven't touched upon, is the fact that everyone keeps saying we have space in our Premier League squad to bring in players, etc., etc. We don't in Europe because we already couldn't register Spence. Let's not forget. So I think that's also going to be a tough conversation with bringing in players. They're going to be asking, which squad am I going to be registered for? And if we do register them for both, it's going to create unrest with the players who are in Europa and who have got us this far, who are now going to have to get dropped. So that's also, a balancing act, from handling all the players in the squad. Because yes, there's the 25 men you can register, but we actually have a lot more than 25 players because a lot of our players are kids for the Premier League squad.
Yeah, and I think just coming back to your point there, Jim, about the differences between where we are now and where we were maybe with Mourinho and Conte is, I think there's a little bit of grace with Ange because we've got a manager who's standing in front of the cameras and saying this is on me, rather than a manager that is pointing the finger at a bin fire that they set fire to. Do you know what I mean? So, the Conte era, the Mourinho era, it was all about how rubbish the players were, how they weren't committed, how this whole club philosophy, blah, 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 anything but me. And then they flick a match behind them, set the place on fire and bugger off. At least it feels like at the moment, whether he ends up being the right man for the job or not, time will tell. But it feels like we've got a manager who cares deeply about wanting to fix things and wants to take ownership for what's in front of him, when it would be really easy for him just to point the finger and say longer term backroom issues, short term injury issues, I'm doing my best, but it's not down to me. You could do a lot of that. He really could. And he's not. And he's standing up and being counted. And you've got to say, at least for that, he deserves to get a full squad back so that he can live or die by his principles.
I think that's a good point. In fact, that not only him not blaming leadership puts him in their good books, but I think also look at the players. If you look at the end of Conte, look at the end of Mourinho, look at the end of Poch. I mean, Nuno from the beginning, the players had given up on their manager. They weren't playing for him anymore. You can't accuse this playing squad of not playing for their manager. They're knackered, they're out, but they're, apart from maybe one or two, Madison, I'm not naming you, but apart from that, I'd say all the rest of them are still playing for the manager. They're still trying to do what he's asking them to do, which says a lot.
Yeah.
Well, look, guys, we've dissected a lot there.
We fixed it all, though. That's the point.
What is the solution then? Summarising it, it sounds like the solution is start to, first things first, the short-term fixes are get a couple of players in this January, not youth players, but players who can immediately help Ange with the current situation. It's to give him till this mid-February period where the players are back and his couple of new signings are bedded in to see, is this on the tactics, is this on the coach, or is it really this proverbial loop of fatigue and injuries leading to things? And then it's surely to stick par with the course on the transfer strategy, right? Continue to think 3 years ahead, solve these club-grown and homegrown issues, which won't be fixed for 2 to 3 years, and then build from there. And kind of when you read it out loud, I feel a bit bad for Ange because it's all teeing up to make him the guy before the guy. He's going to have to go through all this pain, and let's say end of next season, he actually establishes us back in the top 5 or 6 with foundations that you can say, I can see that going on to being a club that can challenge for things again. He's had to do all the work to get us there because, yes, we were there under Conte and Mourinho, but that was because we had Harry Kane and Heung-min Son. Artificially, we were there. We weren't truly that level without one of those players being there. We would then be in a position where you go, that squad is there because the squad is complete, like it was under Pochettino, and that's a much healthier place to be. But then, Ange doesn't stick around for more than 3 years. We may be there going, you won us a League Cup. You got us back there. Forever we are grateful. Some people will still say he failed, but I think the majority of us would say, you've been a saviour to us, getting us to this point. And then it's about getting the next manager in who sticks with the similar-ish philosophy to Ange, so we're not rebuilding all over again, right?
Yeah, and that's what your director of football is there to do, is to set the strategy and the style that they want the football club to go in, right? So, and then you hire management teams that fit that philosophy. So they should. This is all about the culture of the club, right? So they should be talking about the culture, the longer term, the philosophy, the playing style, and then working out how you get that embedded throughout all of the levels of your organisation, not just the first team.
Yeah, I mean, you don't want to make the mistake that, Man U's done. How much money did Erik ten Hag get to spend? And then they brought in a manager with a completely different style who, surprise, surprise, is struggling to get those workhorses to carry out his style of play.
And he's doing a very good job of saying, listen, guys, I've been here 10 minutes. This ain't my fault. This ain't my fault. This ain't my fault. Yeah, go on.
Good ones in.
Can I just, one point, going back to that, the continuation of style of play. If, they're not, I'm 100% sure, but if the rumors coming out of Italy are true that we're talking to Allegri, if he's the man to follow Ange, I am purple and gold up the front.
All day long, mate. I'm going to, I'll paint my face purple and gold.
There will be Oso Spurs branded Levy out stuff.
Yeah,
for sure. Don't let that man anywhere near our club.
We can't swing back to pragmatic football. It would be the most short-sighted. We've just spent all this money and all these
this pain.
Yes, exactly.
And this pain to do it all again.
Yeah. Now I get if come the summer, if Levy wants to push the button because of whatever happens back end of this season, fine, okay, but don't drop the philosophy. You cannot 18 months ago sit there and say, I've got my Tottenham back, or we've got our Tottenham back, and then 18 months later just flip-flop again.
Yeah. Stick with the course, weather the storm, because it's not going to get better in the short term, but the medium and long-term upside is there. And I think we'll just finish off with another final point on what needs to change is we need to stop digging out our own players who are fighting for this cause and are victims of this situation. That isn't all on Ange, it's on these wider things we've mentioned. Heung-min Son getting abuse is insane.
Yeah. Unacceptable, mate.
Unacceptable.
Without using the words, because we don't on air. Well, I get told off for using some of those words sometimes, but without using it, just the abuse from a guy that has done what he's done for our club and been there for everything that this club's been through. For those, it sounded like young lads swearing at him and calling him names. Just horrific, really. Really doesn't deserve that at all.
I mean, the nicest bloke in football, a bloke who signed a contract when our star striker was on strike and we didn't have a manager. I mean, he's given up his entire career for us. And he gets that. I mean, that is just unacceptable.
Totally.
Unacceptable. And even if it was aimed at Ange, it's unacceptable. I'm sorry. You're grown people talking to other grown people. You wouldn't do that in the workplace.
And how does that help, by the way? So just lobbing abuse at them. Listen, boo them. Tell them that the game was rubbish. Tell them that you're really disappointing them. But getting personal and attacking them in that way, how does that help, by the way? I just wonder, as you're shouting those obscenities at those people, those human beings, what are you hoping for them to go, oh, yeah, I didn't realise I was one of them, and I'll sort it out next time?
I think, Si, it's just people are so angry at the situation and because there's no answer to it.
Yeah. Because they don't have an answer. So anger is always external, right? Anger has always got a target.
Yeah.
Anger's never internal. It's always external. So you're right, Jim. It's exactly that.
It's never about you. When someone's angry at you, it's never actually about you. It's about that individual person and how they feel. And they feel by directing some of that energy at you, it's somehow going to make them feel better about the situation.
Yeah.
But
that's also not to belittle the fact that on a Sunday afternoon, 2,500 supporters travelled all the way up to the northwest and had to witness that first half.
That is very true. And that's why it warranted a half-time boo and a come on. Because some of those early lapses were down to the players themselves, as we said. They were avoidable. But we need to get onto our questions before it's too late.
Come on, let's go. Come on, Jim. Come.
I think we've answered some of these, but Sean, the Gooner Slayer, as always.
Go on, Sean.
First, Shorty boy.
Sean, the legend.
Why is the narrative so against Ange? Yes, things are bad, but as pointed out before, Arteta went through the same kind of run in his second year and had no injuries. Kind of answered it, I think.
Yeah, I think
in a way, it's confirmation bias. I think there's a big thing. It's like you've said your Ange out from the start.
Yeah.
It gives you an opportunity to voice that in a popular moment. It's going to get traction.
You've said the Premier League's above the leagues he's managed in. He's not ready for us. You've got the superiority complex, and you just want to confirm that you're right.
But with that, I also concede that I probably have some level of confirmation bias the other way. You know, I will be if he fails and when he leaves the club at some point, whether he's been successful or not. But if he fails, I'll be one of the last ones to let go with my fingernails to my belief that he can still finish the job because, it is what it is, right?
Yeah. So there is bias on both sides, and that bias on both sides just leads to two groups of people who will refuse to say they're wrong, and tensions rise, and it's easy for the media to then play off it because they know they put an article out, that's one side or the other half of the fan base is triggered. So I can understand if you want Ange out and you're listening to this, that's fine.
Absolutely, get it. Your opinion, you're entitled to it, by the way.
Everyone's got an opinion.
And there's cause to it. It's not like, I think before we've said, we've kind of pointed at certain elements of Purple and Gold and said that's mindless way you're going about it. Not all of Purple and Gold. Some of them they have valid points in the way they go about it, but some parts, the extreme parts, are probably just less reasonable people who see it as a status symbol. But let's just all try to be reasonable about it because the media is playing us off each other and everyone else is loving it except Spurs. So
and also no manager's perfect. Ange isn't perfect. I mean, in my opinion, he got the Tamworth lineup wrong. The Galatasaray game he got wrong. Everton, we mentioned it. So he's made mistakes, but all managers do.
And some of his in-game management was subs at times we've questioned, right?
Yeah. Too slow and reactive on the subs.
Absolutely.
Ross says, was the rebuild made worse from the seemingly delayed response from managers like Conte and Jose? Yes, I think we answered that as well. It's a major reason why. Shafay, do you want to give him a song?
Shafay. I haven't got a song for you, Shaf, sorry.
Oh, Shafay.
I haven't got one.
We'll come up with another one next time, mate.
I need a bit more of a run-up.
Do you see many comparisons of Newcastle's drop-off last season and the squad dealing with congested schedule and lots of injuries?
Yeah, there's some comparisons to be had there. I think what bought Howe the time at Newcastle, though, was he had some money in the bank from the season before.
Yeah.
So the season before was a stellar season for Newcastle. It wasn't one that started well and trailed off badly towards the end like ours did. So I think that whilst there's comparisons in terms of absolute numbers of injuries and the impact it had, I think that his saving grace was that he had a stellar season the season before.
I'll just say that both Howe and Ange, when they've had fit squads, have done well. And Newcastle stuck by Howe when he had this injury crisis and results were very poor. Yeah. And I just hope we follow suit. And when we get through the other side of this tunnel and Ange has a fit squad, he then goes on the run, similar to what they're doing.
Yeah, you could level that the Tonali and Bentancur scenarios have some level of similarity around them. Two stupid people making mistakes and getting suspended for significant periods of time.
Yeah. But what is reassuring is when their players come back, it shows how quickly things can change. They won 9 on the
Indeed.
bounce, and suddenly they're taking the mick out of us.
Yeah.
And then they go and lose at home to Bournemouth. If that was Spurs, how Spursy.
Yeah,
But no
naive.
one knows how Newcastle.
Naive.
How naive, yeah.
How naive.
Speaking of
Callaghan.
naive, why hasn't the media gone crazy about Arsenal throwing away a 2-0 lead at home?
We're the funny ones.
Yeah.
Well, to be fair, we are 14th. So
there's a difference. Yeah, we're the big story. We're the big story at the moment.
We're the only guys who could be 14th with a plus 12 goal difference or whatever. It's
insane.
Beggars. Yeah. It's just insane. It's But David Callaghan, I just want to shout you out and say a big thank you from the show. He's been giving lots of advice to us on how we can improve the production quality of our show, and we've got new things coming in that hopefully you'll recognise in association to that. He's been wonderful. So thanks, Dave. Here's a great question, though. I'll rephrase it a little bit to make it easier to answer. But would a club like Liverpool behave differently in our current situation? Because and I want to talk about brand value in a minute, because Kieran Maguire in his book, Price of Football, talks about brand value being undervalued by fans because you can't put a brand value in a balance sheet. So when you compare revenues and transfer spend, all that stuff, you can't put physical value around the brand value, so it doesn't go in there. But Liverpool's brand value is nearly double Spurs. So when they go to sign a player, it's always cheaper for them in a way, because a player will sign for them on 50k a week or 60k a week for Spurs. They'll probably still make more money playing for Liverpool, because they'll get far bigger sponsorships. They'll get infinitely more, social media following overnight, and recognition and clout and all those things that come with playing for a club like Liverpool that are bigger than Spurs. But that aside, because they are a similar-ish club in terms of revenue, and they're not bankrolled by our sugar daddies, there is a comparison there. Would they behave differently, guys? And what would they do differently?
Yeah, they did. Van Dijk and Alisson. Yeah. They knew what they needed. They went out and broke the bank for them.
But they did sell
when Van Dijk was. Yeah, when Van Dijk was bought for his price, everybody was like, "My God, that much for a centre back? Are you sure?" And the same with Alisson. But so I think that they had the foresight to know what they needed and aggressively went and got it. And the other thing as well, though, is that the brand value attracts more, not just what they can earn or their profiling. But let's face it, Liverpool are a massive club and they attract the top players.
I wanted the same.
Just playing for them is an attraction, right?
Look at Moani. I mean, he wanted to play Champions League football, which is why I went to Juve. But also, whether we like to admit it or not, Juve has a reputation.
History.
They're known as winning titles. Yeah, but they're known as winning many, many titles.
Exactly.
And we aren't. So we struggle, I think, with that pull.
Yep.
Right, guys. I'm going to need to wrap us up there. We did have a few more questions to get through, but it's because my connection is just about to die where I am.
Okay.
So I don't want to just continue recording the show and then it all to fall off a cliff and not get the recordings in. But we did have some great other questions that we will answer later on. But I hope you've enjoyed the show. Don't forget you can sign up to become a member on YouTube if you're interested. If you're listening on YouTube, also follow us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or whatever you listen to on it. That helps out as well. But up the Spurs, guys.
Come on, you Spurs.
Oh, and Johnny, hope you're feeling better soon, mate.
And hope you feel better soon, Johnny.